Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a text that was literally designed to be read in just 1 or 2 hours, offering a highly dynamic, fast-paced view of Jesus' life. We're talking about the Gospel of Mark. Now, it holds the unique distinction of being the absolute shortest of the 4 Gospel accounts. But hey, don't let its length fool you. As we dig into the source material today, you're going to see exactly how this text was crafted to be an incredibly fast-moving, high-energy narrative that leaves you almost breathless.
What's really fascinating here is the number 40. You see, the Greek word euthes, which basically translates to immediately, at once, or without delay, actually occurs over 40 times in this one relatively short account. The writer isn't just casually telling a story here. He is setting a uniquely urgent pace. You are constantly being propelled from one scene to the very next without even a moment to catch your breath. To truly wrap our heads around this fast-moving account, we're going to break it down into 5 clear sections. First up, the action-packed gospel. Second, the man named Mark. Third, writing for the Romans. Fourth, ministry around Galilee. And finally, the final days. All right, section 1, the action-packed gospel. Let's look at how Mark's foundational approach really distinguishes itself from the others.
This brilliantly illustrates the strategic contrast between the historical writers. You know, Matthew was written to portray Jesus as the promised Messiah and King, leaning heavily into lengthy sermons and deep theology. But Mark strips all of that right back. He portrays Jesus as a conquering savior, a real man of action. It's heavily focused on what he did rather than just what he said.
To really put that action into perspective, Mark references at least 19 distinct miracles. He prioritizes incredible actions and immediate reactions way above extensive dialogue. According to the source material, he only records a tiny handful of illustrations or parables. The whole emphasis is consistently on Jesus as a miracle-working figure who is just continuously in motion.
Moving on to section 2, the man named Mark. We have to ask, who exactly wrote this, and what kind of architect builds this sort of rapid-fire narrative?
Well, ancient tradition points out that Mark wasn't just pulling these stories out of thin air. Actually, the Apostle Peter, who associated really closely with Mark in Babylon, was the primary source for a lot of these accounts. Mark captures these incredibly vivid, emotional details of how Jesus felt and reacted. You know, the kind of gritty details that really only come from someone who was standing right there in the room.
So Mark, whose name actually comes from the Latin Marcus, was the Roman surname for a man also known as John. He was deeply, deeply embedded in the early Christian missionary network. His mother Mary was an early disciple in Jerusalem, and Mark himself was actually the cousin of Barnabas. Because he traveled all over the place with major historical heavyweights like Paul, Barnabas, and Peter, he was just perfectly positioned to write this text. And all the evidence points to him completing this account in Rome, somewhere between the years 60 and 65 CE.
Which brings us perfectly to section 3, writing for the Romans. Because location absolutely matters, and writing from Rome had a massive impact on exactly who Mark was targeting.
Mark evidently wrote primarily for a non-Jewish Roman audience, and he made some seriously pragmatic adjustments to keep them hooked. Step by step, he actually pauses to explain entirely unfamiliar Jewish customs. He translates Hebrew and Aramaic expressions so nobody gets lost. He provides extra geographical context, and fascinatingly, he even explains the value of local coins in Roman terms. He was making absolutely sure that cultural friction wouldn't slow down his reader. To connect even further with his audience, Mark frequently dropped in specific Latin expressions and idioms. He uses terms like speculator for a bodyguard, praetorium for the governor's residence, and centulio for an army officer. By speaking the literal language of the Roman military and authority, Mark frames the whole narrative in a vocabulary that would just instantly resonate with them.
Now that we've got the context, let's hit section 4, ministry around Galilee. Let's explore the actual outline of the events, starting right there with his early public ministry.
We can literally watch the action explode outward geographically here. After a super brief lead-up covering the baptism and temptation, boom, we are thrown right into the public ministry around the Sea of Galilee. This is where Jesus calls his disciples and heals massive crowds in Capernaum. And soon after that, the action expands rapidly to the regions of the north and east, taking the message into entirely new places like the Decapolis.
Staying true to that action-oriented focus we talked about, Mark absolutely packs this Galilean phase with high-energy miracles. Just picture the sequence of events. calming a violent windstorm one moment and then expelling demons into a herd of swine the next. From resurrecting Jairus' daughter from the dead to miraculously feeding 5,000 men and literally walking on water. For a Roman audience that highly valued absolute power, these rapid-fire displays of total command over nature and the spiritual realm would have been incredibly gripping.
And that brings us to the climax in Section 5, the final days. The geographic journey shifts rapidly away from Galilee, moving decisively toward its ultimate conclusion in Jerusalem.
The narrative pushes south, moving swiftly through Perea and Jericho, where we see major events like the healing of blind Bartimaeus. But everything, and I mean everything, is barreling toward those final days of public ministry in Jerusalem. It all kicks off with a triumphal entry, but it quickly escalates. Jesus curses a fig tree, cleanses the temple, and has his authority repeatedly, directly challenged by the religious leaders.
Mark details this incredibly intense final sequence around the specific date of Nisan 14. In the days just prior, the priests are plotting, and Judas arranges his betrayal. Then, on Nisan 14 itself, the pace reaches an absolute fever pitch. As a reader, you are rushed through the evening meal, the agonizing prayer in Gethsemane, the sudden arrest, the trial, and ultimately the execution at Golgotha. And then, immediately following that, we see the burial and the stunning discovery of the empty tomb.
So, as you digest the source material we've covered in this explainer today, consider the profound impact of this text's unique design. How powerfully would this urgent, action-packed narrative have resonated with its original Roman audience in the 1st century? The strategic pacing, the intense focus on sheer power, the careful translation of foreign concepts. It is an absolute masterclass in targeted historical writing. It really makes you wonder, what details might you discover if you sat down right now and read this compelling, continuous action sequence for yourself in a single hour?